Sup? Welcome to the TTB Trucks podcast. This is episode number 5, and I am Adam Choit. For now, to follow this show, it's at TTB Trucks podcast on Instagram, and I'm at Adam Choit on Instagram as well if you want to follow me. And just a disclaimer, I have no affiliation with the band. This is not an official podcast or anything. I'm just a fan. Anyway, I hope you're enjoying this podcast. If so, I would greatly appreciate it if you would take the time to write out a short positive review on iTunes. This is definitely helpful. And again, I'm going to do my best to continue to put out episodes weekly. Haven't really picked out a day yet in specific, but be sure to follow this podcast on social media and subscribe. For today's episode number 5, I have a guest. His name is Tom Emmi. He is the producer of the tribute documentary, Lest We Forget Kofi Burbridge, all about the late Kofi Burbridge, flautist and keyboardist. I have a feeling many of you listening are quite aware of who Kofi is. But Tom himself is a TV producer and music producer, and produced Studio Jams, a music TV series that had quite a nice run on the BET Jazz Network. And he's always had a passion for music, and we talk about that and, of course, the Kofi documentary. Let's just get into it. Here's Tom Emmi. So it's good to talk to you today, Tom Emmi. Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure, Adam. My pleasure.
Oh, I appreciate it. How's your day going?
It's going well. We're here in Philadelphia, and it's a beautiful day. As I told you, I just finished some yard work, so I'm feeling already halfway through my to-do list. So
the apocalypse is treating you well?
Yeah, it is. Actually, I think, knock on wood, I think I've been quite productive being holed up, working from home, and I'm getting a lot of things organized and pushed off the desk. And so, yeah, it's been on a work front. It's been a good thing. You know?
Yeah, I feel like the same for me, and I feel like probably that way for a lot of people. People going one way or the other. Either you're getting more done and taking advantage of the time, or you're just eating potato chips on the couch and doing nothing. I don't know.
Right.
Well, yeah, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and your background, and we can get into the doc and go from there.
Sure. I am a television producer, television/music producer. I've been involved in shooting and writing and producing for 20 some odd years. Back in 1999, I believe it was. Just a little personal sidebar. I lost my mother many, many years ago, and I was close with my father. And when he passed, well, when you lose your one parent, you become, life goes on. But when you lose your second, you suddenly realize you're a midlife orphan. And, your perspective on things changes a little bit. And my dad had always said, Tom, whatever you do, try to make a difference. And so when he passed away in 1999, I decided to get out of corporate America. And I was a cable executive in advertising and promotions for Comcast. And so I got out of corporate America and started my own company, built on basically 3 different pillars. One was education, television, and music. And so I would get involved in all types of projects as long as it hit 1, 2, or all 3 of those threads. So I would be hired by labels to do EPKs, electronic press kits for artists, or managers and the like. So I was doing a lot of music and music education pieces and whatever. So I was producing a program called Music Makers, and I needed some B-roll for that. So I brought a bunch of musician friends who just happened to be passing through Philadelphia one particular weekend, and we went into the studio and they just jammed. And that particular day, it was Victor Wooten and Roy Wooten, Jeff Coffin, Derek Trucks,
wow,
Chuck Andrus, Joey DiFrancesco on B3s, some killer musicians. And when it was finished, Victor said, this is great, Tom. It was great to come into the studio and just jam to give you some B-roll for your other program. But I got to tell you, Tom, this was so much fun. This is a series. So I took his advice and I created a show called Studio Jams. And if you go to studiojams.com, you can see bits and pieces of what are now, we have 80 episodes, but it's basically bringing guys into the studio who don't typically work with one another, and they have a go at it. And for 2 hours, we tape them as they talk through songs or even just grooves. They're not even songs. Or they'll pick a song and they'll work out a quick head arrangement and play it from top to bottom a couple times, and then move on. We don't go in and punch in and fix up bass parts or whatever it might be. It's just live, and it's very spontaneous. And so lo and behold, I pitched it to BET, which is Black Entertainment Television, and they picked it up, and I proceeded to have almost 7 years on the network. It became their number one rated jazz series, but it opened up my Rolodex tremendously in a short period of time. So when that series started, it was I'm on the phone talking with musicians or managers, and they would be like, "Oh, so Tom, you want my guy to come in the studio and you want to tape him, but you don't know who he's going to play with and you don't know what he's going to play? I don't think so, Tom." So it was tough to get musicians, but after BET picked it up and we were midway through our first year, my phone started ringing off the hook. I would get calls from managers saying, "Hey, my guy is passing through Philly. We love that series. Are you taping? Can he be on the show?" And so my Rolodex it really grew, and it was some of the most musical fun I've ever had in my life, because it was on BET, and although it stands for Black Entertainment Television, they didn't handcuff me and say, "Hey, Tom, you got to have black artists, or it has to be straight ahead jazz, or it can't be fusion." Or they basically just gave me a clear canvas and said, "Do what you want. We love what you're doing. Have at it." So
That's
I was
awesome.
able to mix Bela Fleck with Pat Martino, or Chris Thiele with Steve Kimmock, and we mixed and matched, and it was so much fun, Adam. It was so much fun, and so we produced that for a while, and then. Fast forward to 20, and I'm getting the answer again. This is a long-winded answer, but I'm getting to your question. You wanted my background, so I'm kind of giving it to you in one, dumping it all on you here. But back in 2016, I was talking to my friend Leland Sklar. He's a bass player out in Los Angeles. And it was shortly after Leonard Cohen, or it might have been Leon Russell, I can't recall, but after one of them passed away. And he said, "Tom, they ought to just skip the Grammy Awards this year and instead do a special for everybody who died in 2016. And that year, of course, it was Prince and Merle Haggard and Glenn Frey and David Bowie, and a lot of heavyweights."
Yeah, so many.
So I said, "Yeah, look, that's not a bad idea, Lee." So I took that studio jams concept that I've been doing for years and said, what if I went down to Nashville, hooked up with an MD or two, a music director, who could sort of herd together some of the key musicians that would be required for some of the tributes. Like we brought in Radney Foster, a country singer, to do the Merle Haggard tribute, and the different musicians. And so I brought a TV crew down to Nashville, and we stayed at a studio right outside of Nashville for 3 days, and we had musicians coming in and out, and it had a real kumbaya feeling of, we're all doing this just to honor the people who passed. And it was a labor of love, total labor of love. Everybody, all the production people, myself included, we just put our work on hold and said, let's go do this, because we all dig music, and we all, just loved all these musicians who had passed away. So we went and produced a 1-hour special, and then that led to a second year. We did it in 2017 and again 2018, and it's been expanding. I'm currently now wrapping up Lest We Forget 2019, which we taped in January to honor all the musicians who passed away last year. So as that whole Lest We Forget project has grown, one of my producers had said, we're talking to all these musicians and getting sound bites from them about all the people who've passed away and have been influential to them. Why don't we just expand it? And instead of coming up with a 5 to 7 minute tribute on Tony Joe White, why don't we make it into a half hour and get a little more in depth? And I said, that's not a bad idea. And also just one little sidebar, Adam, and that was when we honoring people with our Lest We Forget specials, yes, we have to honor Prince and Merle Haggard and David Bowie and all the big names, and I love them. But personally, I have always been drawn to the sidemen, the guys behind the scenes, or the drummers in these bands, and the guys that you have no idea who they are, but they contributed so much. So we said, yeah, if we're going to expand these little short tributes and come up with a half-hour show, let's pick somebody who's not mainstream. And I first name that came to mind was, Kofi. Most people in the general public have no idea who Kofi was.
Right.
I've known Kofi I first met him back in 2001. And, I know his brother. I've done a few things with O'Teal and, that whole tribe of the Wooten brothers and Bela Fleck and that whole group, I've had associations with for a number of years. And I thought, Kofi would be perfect, man, because he's such a beautiful soul. And being in Nashville, so we talked to a lot of people who knew him, and we accumulated a bunch of sound bites from folks. And then I also had video footage that I shot of O'Teal back in 2001 and 2007. I mean, Kofi and O'Teal, actually, but both of them back in 2001 and 2007. And then O'Teal was kind enough to provide some still photographs. And lo and behold, Adam, in a relatively short period of time, we had accumulated a nice variety of source material of still pictures, old videos, sound bites. So then I reached out to Derek and his group, Blake Budney, who I just have tons of respect for, Derek's manager. Blake opened the door for us to speak at length with Susan and Derek. So we sat down with them, and they were very forthcoming and really showed their heart, opened their hearts to this project. And lo and behold, it continues to be a labor of love. But we put together a 30-minute, well, actually it's a 35-minute Lest We Forget Kofi Burbridge. So it's the first extended tribute to one individual that we've done, but we're already working on our second and third one right now. But are
you allowed to say who those are tributes to?
Oh, sure. The next one we're doing is on Randy Scruggs, Earl Scruggs in Lester Flat. The country guys who long time passed, but Randy Scruggs was Earl Scruggs' son, and he was a Nashville producer, guitarist, singer, songwriter. Again, he's a little bit under the radar for a lot of people, but he was major contributions in the Nashville music scene.
Sure.
So is that again a long-winded answer, Adam?
No problem. I want to actually go back, because I wanted to ask you, where does your passion for music come from? It sounded like maybe it comes from your father. Like, what kind of music were you into as a kid? Were you a musician? Did you play? What's kind of your music background? Sure.
At the risk of sounding like a bit of a nerd, I like to tell people I was the New York State accordion champion in 1975.
Oh boy.
Back when playing the accordion was a pretty nerdy thing to do, but I always dug the sound of the accordion. I still do. I've always thought it was a hip sound. And so anyways, I've been playing music since I was 8 years old or so. And I mean, now I only pick up the accordion, 2 or 3 times a year to entertain my nieces. But then I switched over to piano on my own. So my right hand is much stronger than my left, because in an accordion, it's buttons on your left hand. So I had to learn how to, create chords and I'm a hack. I'm a piano hack.
It's okay.
But I've always dug music, and I love, honestly, Adam, I love all kinds of music as long as it comes from the heart. I can dig anything as long as it comes from the heart.
What was your favorite kind of music growing up? Did you have a favorite kind, though, even though you were kind of having an eclectic taste? Was it like classic rock? Was it that kind of stuff?
No, I've always been into, I would say, jazz first and foremost, and then R&B. Never got into real classic rock or prog rock, and I never grabbed hold of that. But oddly enough, here I'm like 15, 16 years old, and I'm digging, jazz music. So I was, I don't know. None of my friends liked it. They were all into the rock scene. But
Sure.
I dig rock too. Don't get me wrong. I love it.
I got you. Cool. Well, I think now that we're caught up, we can kind of pick up, I guess, on the documentary and talk about that.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I just watched it a few moments before we got together on this call, and I definitely agree and feel a lot of the sentiments that you were saying, just in describing the experience of making it. Like, it was definitely emotional and entertaining, and it breezes by at 35 minutes, and it's just people talking about Kofi. And it's just very, very engaging. And congratulations on making this, for sure. And I loved it, and I'm going to definitely recommend it to people and send it to people for sure.
Thank you, Adam. There are a couple of people that I really wished we would have been able to connect for it, but scheduling wise, we just couldn't make it happen. And I mean, those people in particular, Jeff Coffin, who I just love. He would have, and he was very close to Kofi. He would have added a really nice perspective, as would have Jeff Sipe, who I've never met Jeff, but his name comes up periodically, and I'd love to connect with him one day. But I'm sure Jeff would have had some wonderful things to contribute as well.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I'll just mention some things that just jumped out at me about the documentary, and we can kind of talk about them and kind of go from there for sure.
Sure.
Something Tim LaFave said, because he was describing how Kofi would be, often interacting with the audience during the show and making eye contact with them and being engaging. And I definitely remember that, just from going to, because I've been to about 15, 20 Tedeschi Trucks Band shows, and Kofi, was behind the organ and playing flute at most of them. And I remember that. I remember him being pretty much the most engaging, member of the band in terms of, interacting with the audience. Not saying that it's wrong that the others, maybe more focused on their own, just in their own world, so to speak. But I definitely remember that jumping out at me about Kofi and recalling that when Tim was mentioning that.
Yeah, Kofi certainly was a people person, that's for sure. And as I think O'Teal mentioned in the piece, he always made time for people. Kofi, when I first met Kofi, he just dropped what he was doing and just said, what do you want to talk about, Tom? And it was just an open book. There was no hidden agenda, and he would just, he was one of the warmest musicians and unpretentious musicians you'd ever want to meet. I miss him a lot, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, and even another thing that Tim said was how he would describe how he was always interested in other people and what they were up to and what they were doing. And even just me, someone who he doesn't know, I went up to the stage after a show here in LA at the Orpheum. This must have been 2016 or 17. And I get him to sign my set list or whatever. And he starts asking me, am I a musician? Do I play guitar? He starts asking me all these questions. I couldn't believe it. It was quite something. So he's definitely a people person, as I remember Derek also mentioning on the doc.
And that's a refreshing trait, don't you think?
For sure.
Yeah. And it seems, they get the egos get in the way and they want to talk about themselves. But he was just the opposite.
Yeah, just some other things that jumped out at me. Just how people on the doc were describing when Kofi, plays a solo, everyone kind of listens, listening extra closely, and just to you know listen to hear what he might do, just because it's going to be something that has a virtuoso
Yeah.
quality to it. And I find myself doing that as well. Almost every time I'm just I have Tedeschi Trucks Band music on, or Derek Trucks Band, and I hear Kofi's flute, I pretty much stop what I'm doing, no matter what I'm doing, and I just
Yeah.
kind of almost just it just grabs me. And even sometimes when I have Tedeschi Trucks Band on in like the background, and I'm not even paying super close attention to the music, I'm doing something else, and he'll be playing an extended organ solo or a keyboard solo, and something he'll do will catch my ear, and again I'll stop what I'm doing, and I'll be like, oh my god, what planet is this guy from? Where did he come up with that idea? It's just insane to me, and I find myself relating to a lot of what was being said on the documentary in terms of just being grabbed by the things that Kofi did musically.
It's interesting, Adam. In doing some of the interviews for this piece, three people in particular, Derek and Susan for sure. But when we talked to the two of them, there were moments in their answers and to whatever question, or as they were reminiscing about the night that they learned of his passing, and it was coming from their heart. They were tear on the verge of tears a few different times, and
I'm sure I was while watching it.
Yeah, it was pretty heavy, and then the third person was Nigel Hall from Lettuce. In talking with Nigel, I mean, there were a couple of Barbara Walters moments, if you know what I mean. He broke down, and there was the extended pause where I wanted to be respectful and not, I wanted him to express how he felt, which he did, but it was a difficult interview for him at times because, if I had asked him to, where were you when you heard he died, or whatever the question was, whatever, it took him back to a moment that was tender to him. And after the interview, I remember saying, Nigel, I'm so appreciative of spending the time with us and for being as open as you were. And I assure you, I'm only going to use the good stuff, and be respectful of your feelings as I cut this together. And he says, Tom, you use what you want. It was coming from my heart, and people need to know what an influence Kofi had on me, and go for it. And I said, okay, but by the same token, it was a very, very personal moment with him, and I, as a TV producer, it was gold. You know what I mean? It's like, wow,
Sure.
It's this is what you want to get in interviews, is heartfelt responses to whatever, happiness, sadness, whatever it is. But as a human, I felt that I was in somewhat sacred ground. You know what I mean?
Yeah, everyone was definitely very vulnerable for sure, and expressive of their feelings on the documentary. And I personally appreciate that. That means a lot. And I think sometimes when you see these sort of tributes or hear about tributes, maybe they focus too much on someone's death, and you don't want to focus on as much the death, and you want to focus more on the life. But I think you did a good job with that. And I think, his passing and the night of his passing in specific was definitely it's part of the story.
Yeah.
And just seeing how emotional everyone gets and capturing those vulnerable moments, that just shows how much Kofi meant to everyone.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting too, Adam, to see, or I thought it was important to show how the band felt that night. Do we go on? Do we cancel the show? The day he passed in DC, do we go on with the concert or not? And I found that to be an interesting.
Yeah, that's another thing about the doc. I got to hear things and learn things that I did not know. Like I didn't know like exactly what the band was going through the night, Kofi passed and what that was like, and that Derek wanted to cancel the show, and it was Susan who stepped in and said, no, we're not doing it. Because I remember I watched the YouTube clips. I listened to the show, and you could hear, the sorrow and the pain in her voice, and really through all of their instruments. There's something definitely special about that show at the Warner that night.
Yeah, actually, my hope was to finish the documentary and have it ready to go on the 1-year anniversary of his death, because on February 15th, they were playing again at the Warner Theater in D.C.
Right.
And I thought, well, that would be a good target, but, didn't happen. So things take a little longer always,
Yeah, and it was also just interesting to hear on the doc that, when Derek met Kofi and Susan, that was all kind of all around the same time, around the same month. And that's something I didn't know. So that just little moments and little snippets of life can have a profound, impact on the rest of our lives and the direction of it. So it's interesting to hear that factoid for sure.
Yeah. So it was a labor of love, and it we're pleased with how it came to be. In working with Blake Budney, Blake turned me on to Renee Pfeffer, the publicist for the band, and Renee was helpful in lining some things up. And she was the first one to share with me the existence of the Music Matters Fund. The Kofi Burbridge Music Matters Fund is part of Mr. Holland's Opus Foundation, ways to raise funds for that cause, and that cause is basically providing new instruments for schools.
Yeah, I donated. I get mail from them.
Mm-hmm. So she turned me on to that, and the thought was, well, heck, in the spirit of what we're trying to do, which is basically honor musicians, and let's try to extend their legacy and things that are important to them or that they were involved in. If there's a way that we can support it, let's do it. So that's how we tied in Music Matters. Renee was a big part of that for us.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Just sounds like an amazing guy. I mean, I didn't know Kofi, well or personally or anything. Just had a couple of interactions with him over the years at shows, but it sounds like he was just an amazing person, and just as an amazing of a musician.
Yeah, and I would suggest, Adam, if you in a future podcast for you, more insight on Kofi would be with Jeff Coffin. Jeff and Kofi were very, very close. And do you know Jeff?
I do not.
Do you know who he is or of him?
I don't.
Jeff is a saxophone player. He replaced Howard Levy in Bela Fleck and the Flecktones years ago. So he was with Bela and Victor and Roy for a while. But then, and I'm guessing here, I'm going to say 6 years ago, maybe. I'm not sure. But he joined the Dave Matthews Band. So he's a sax player with Dave Matthews now. Gotcha. But he lives in Nashville, and he's very tight with O'Teal and Kofi and Vic Wooten and all those guys. And but he especially was very close with Kofi. So his perspective, he probably has a ton of personal stories that you might find interesting or that your audience would dig.
Yeah, it's funny how they described. I think it was O'Teal who said it was like Kofi was blind. Basically, that's how good his ear was, and that's how great he was at being a virtuoso and just picking up tunes. And he was the tuner.
Yeah,
the tuner for the band.
Hey, it's funny too. I've always been impressed by musicians who are so incredibly skilled at seemingly unrelated instruments. I mean, it's one thing to play, guitar and mandolin. They're both stringed instruments.
Right.
And, they're different, but there's some similarities, I guess. But when you get someone like a flautist and a keyboard player, it's like, oh, wow. and you excel at both of them. Or like Joey DeFrancesco, who's a monster B3 organ player, but he plays a mean trumpet, man. He's a great trumpet player. And I'm just always amazed. And so I look at somebody like Kofi, and it's like,
Yeah, I've seen some of the reactions at shows or from people who are not super familiar with Kofi or TTB, and he's playing organ, and then he takes out the flute and he stands up, and people are like, what the hell? People are really caught off guard in a great way.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a soothing sound. Soothing is the flute. I always describe it as that. Soothing Kofi.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just before I forget, and just to mention it to you for what it's worth, I mentioned just a second ago, Jeff Coffin would be a wonderful person for you to talk with. For any of those guys, and I don't know your Rolodex, but if I can help in any way with what you're doing and connect you with some of these guys, just please let me know offline, and I'll be happy to connect you.
You have no idea how much I appreciate that, for sure. I mean, this is going to be an ongoing thing. The goal for me is just to put this out weekly and do episodes about all things Tedeschi trucks and all things related. So I'm pretty open to different guests and different types of episodes, for sure. So that means a lot to me.
All right, great. No problem. I've one thing that I've always tried to do since, again, going back to when my father passed, and he always said, Tom, make a difference, is that if there's anything I can do with any of my projects to support musicians, and they know it, musicians that I've worked with, they all know that I'm on their side. Like if I'm shooting an episode for some show or something, and they've just come out with a record or a new release, I'm saying, hey, you want to? I got the cameras, and we're running tape here. Or, tell me about your new album. So that they can use the footage for their websites or their EPKs, whatever they have going on. We're all, not to sound trite, we're all in this together. Everybody's trying to gain momentum, and so if I can play a part in it and help folks, I mean, that's why we're here, Adam.
That's totally the vibe of the band also. Like and I've mentioned this on past episodes already, they just seem, and they've said it and they live it, that they just are all in it for the right reasons, which is the music, really, and just passion for the music and for each other, and trying to uplift each other and the fans and everyone they touch.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like you're doing, not to cut you off, but it sounds like you have the same attitude and the same approach and the same mentality. And that's, I'm aspiring to, do similar with this, for sure. And I want to, make sure that I'm in it, and doing this for the right reasons, all the way through.
Because what you find, at least what I have found, is that, the law of reciprocity, the more you give, the more it comes back, and people like working with you. And you never know down the road, as you're working your way up the ladder, at some point you're going to encounter the same people coming down.
Right.
And you always have the relationship you establish with people is so important. And what's often with, I'll use the word stars or big names, some people think like, oh, they got a huge ego. They don't really have an ego necessarily. Some do, but sometimes that's confused with, like Derek. Derek is a legitimate star, but he is down to earth and he's open, but he's pulled from 1,000 directions, and so they can't accommodate everybody.
Right.
And some people are like, oh, I wanted to interview him, and he said no. He said no to my interview request. Well, it's because he had 1,700 interview requests that same day. Cut him some slack.
Right.
But I mean, Derek's not of that mold. Derek is so giving. But you know what I'm talking about? Just the stars.
Yeah, I think they're legends, actually, at this point. Susan, Derek, and Kofi. That's kind of the word that I keep kind of like using in my head, even when I like go to shows and I see like Susan and Derek play and sing and play guitar. Like I think they're right up there with, the Allman Brothers, and Derek's right there with Clapton, Jimi Hendrix, Duane Allman, and those guys are all legends. And people tend to think of legends as someone, I guess, who passed or whatever, but I don't know. I think they're already legends.
I would agree with you. And it's and this is a little bit of the tragic tragedy of losing Kofi. Because relatively speaking, Kofi was a young man,
Right.
and he had a lot more to give. And Derek is a young man too, and it's refreshing and comforting to know that, knock on wood, there's 20, 30, how many more years of more fresh Derek Trucks music coming out of him. Whereas now Kofi, boom, that faucet has stopped. And that's the sad part,
Yeah.
Because he's so young.
I think I've asked some of the band members at shows before, some of the other members of Tedeschi Trucks Band, how many more albums you got? How many more tours? How many more years do you think this is going to keep going? And all the responses were just, it's going to keep going. Like it seemed like there was no end in sight, that they were just going to keep at it, which I'm happy about for sure. Because I feel, Mike Madison just put out a solo album, and everyone sometimes wants to work on different things. But it seems like the band is going to keep going, even with side projects here and there.
Yeah, I would like to one day meet Mike Madison. I'm impressed by him. I've never met him, never spoke with him, but I find him to be an interesting member of the band for sure.
Yeah, another super talent for sure.
Mm-hmm.
We covered a lot, my friend. Is there anything else you want to talk about as far as that, about the experience of shooting the doc or the aftermath of putting it together that's worth discussing?
Yeah, nothing really comes to mind other than, it was just a total joy working with all those guys, management, Blake and Renee, on the PR side, of course, Derek and Susan. It's a wonderful organization they have going. I'm thrilled that they were a part of it, and that they've been so supportive of it. We hope to do another one of these on Greg Allman. Here, I know I just said we want to focus on some of the lesser known names, but to do a nice little similar type documentary on Greg is down the road.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Do them all. Do them all.
Yeah.
Do the docs for everyone who's worthy of them. Big names or smaller names.
And so I guess if I didn't, to wrap it up, I would say people could see the documentary. They could go to it's studiojams.vhx.tv, like Victor House X-ray. Studiojams.vhx.tv. And also, I guess, encourage your listeners, if they dig improvisational music with fresh, spontaneous creation thereof, to go to studiojams.com and get a taste of some of those programs, because it's interesting stuff as well.
Great. Any other social media or websites or any other plugs you want to promote? The floor is yours, my friend.
Sure. Again, this is called, the documentary is called Lest We Forget Kofi Burbridge, but we have a website. We're not a nonprofit organization, but it's lestweforgetmusicians.com. And there you'll find short tributes to, I don't know, probably now maybe 60 or 70 different musicians over the past 3 or 4 years who've passed away. Short little music tributes. So yeah, lestweforgetmusicians.com. That's a fun site as well.
Cool. Sounds like you're a hardworking man. Got many projects in the works, and I'm looking forward to all of them for sure.
No, I thank you, Adam. So it's a pleasure speaking with you, and I love talking about this project. And it's been my pleasure.
Oh, you got it. Enjoy the rest of your day, my friend.
I will.
So there you go. My conversation with Tom Emmi. I must say that conversation meant a lot to me, personally. And I really appreciate Tom taking the time, being so nice, and for offering to help me with this show in any way he can. Wow. I'm pretty speechless about a lot of things already swirling around this show. I guess not speechless because I'm a podcast host, but You know what I mean. But for real, hope everyone out there stays safe and well and life gets back to normal soon and live music becomes a thing again. For now, check out Tedeschi Trucks Podcast on Instagram. That's at Tedeschi Trucks Podcast. And of course, remember to tap subscribe or follow on iTunes, Spotify, or whichever way you listen to this show. And again, positive reviews on iTunes are greatly appreciated. And I also have another podcast that I host called People We Love. And what I do with that one is interview people from all walks of life, often stand-up comedians and other artists in the entertainment business, about their lives and careers. But I also ask them to highlight someone they love, who has inspired and influenced them. It's a lot of fun. Check it out. PeopleWeLovePodcast.com and at People We Love Podcast on Instagram. And of course, I'm at Adam Choit on Instagram as well. But yeah, that's about all I got for today. And again, thanks for listening. I appreciate it. Later.